Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris. I'm part of the team here at Quadratech, which is now part of Quest Software. I'm joined by our CTO and Microsoft MVP, Paul Robichaud. I'll hand over to Paul in a moment. Just want to let you know that all lines will be muted during the duration of the webinar, but feel free to ask any questions at any time using the question box. And we will do a Q&A at the end. But with that, I shall hand over to Paul. How to increase first call resolution. Please tell us all about it, Paul.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And hello, everyone. I appreciate you joining me. For those of you who are in the Northeast, apparently you're about to get all the snow in the world. And I definitely have feelings of gratitude that I'm not going to get any of it because I live in Alabama where it's only raining. So with that said, holiday season, everybody is busy, and all of you have probably had the same kinds of experiences that I have had recently with being a customer of service desk operations. I had a problem with an order that I had placed from a retailer, and I tried to contact their service desk to fix it. And the experience was very long and drawn out and painful, and it required more than one contact for me to get the problem fixed. As a customer, that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And as an enterprise, the company that I was dealing with wasted money and wasted time by having to handle more than one contact from me to solve the problem. So from a service desk perspective, whether you are a retailer or an internet service provider or an airline, or as I think most of you probably are, you're involved with a service desk at an IT organization that's providing IT-focused services to your internal users, who you can think of as customers. The more you can do to increase the percentage of calls that you handle on the first touch, the better. So that's what we're going to talk about today. There are a few things that I think when we get into discussion of them, you'll look at it and say, okay, that's obvious. I can see why that would make sense. But hopefully you'll walk away from this with a few things that are non-obvious that you can apply to your internal processes to help you improve that first call resolution rate. So I want to start with talking a little bit about the benefits of increasing your FCR. Okay, and just throughout the presentation, I'm going to use FCR as a shorthand for the percentage of calls or the rate of calls that are completely handled and closed on the first contact. In other words, if I call you and I say, my computer doesn't work, and you say, did you check to see if it's plugged in? And I say, oh no, the cat pulled the power cord out. And I plug it in and then the computer works and I say, great, close this ticket. I would consider that to be a first call resolution case, because on the first time that I contacted you with the problem, you walked me through the solution. The problem was actually solved, as opposed to just saying, oops, works as designed. And I didn't need to call back and follow up. Okay, so we'll talk first about the benefits of raising your FCR percentage. We'll talk about some reasons why it's probably not as high as you would like it to be right now, because that helps give us some context for understanding things that we can do to improve FCR going forward. Then we'll use a phrase that I especially like at the holiday time, which is trimming the troubleshooting tree. Now, I don't mean decorate the tree, I mean cut branches off it, and you'll see what I mean when we get to that part of the presentation. We'll talk about the importance of having broad activity data and audit data about what users are doing in the service, so that you can understand what problems they're actually having as opposed to what problems you think they might be having, as opposed to, and this is the tricky part, what problems they may have told you they have, because those things don't always match. And then we'll talk about a few practical tools that you can put in your toolbox to help figure out exactly where a root cause for a problem lies, because as you'll see, correctly identifying the root cause and putting it in the proper bucket is absolutely essential to improving your FCR performance. So 5 reasons, all of which are going to resonate with anybody who has ever talked to a service desk or managed a service desk. The first is that basically, for every 1% that you improve your FCR, you reduce your operating costs by 1%. Now, I would argue that. I think in a lot of environments, you'll see that your operating costs decrease more than 1% for every 1% FCR improvement. Why do I think that? Well, consider what percentage of your calls are actually coming from what percentage of users. We all know, and some of us have been this person, that some users generate more calls than others. So if you can effectively, quickly handle first calls from the users who generate the most calls, it seems intuitive that you would save more money than just a one-for-one reduction, but I don't have data to back that up. And I admit that I could be wrong about that. Number two, and this is indisputable, when you improve your FCR, you're absolutely going to improve your customer satisfaction or your CSAT. One of the things that was really interesting to me when I worked at Dell, the entire Dell organization, from Michael Dell all the way down to the lowest, most junior position, the entire company was graded on one metric, and that metric was what Dell calls Net Promoter Score. Some of you have heard of this metric before. It's basically a metric that says when you survey a customer and ask them, how was your interaction and would you recommend Dell to other people? The more people that say, yes, I would recommend Dell strongly, the higher your NPS is. And so a lot of their processes were tailored toward raising NPS by doing things like driving up FCR, driving down wait time for support calls, and so on. So again, SQM found that there's a one-for-one connection here. I would say maybe, at a certain point, if you take your FCR rate from 75% to 80%, I bet you see more than a 5% improvement in CSAT, right? So the lower your FCR is when you start, I think the bigger the immediate gains in customer sat. But again, I don't have data to back that up. Improve employee satisfaction. Well, yes, that's obvious too, because nobody wants to have to work on the same problem over and over and over again. Let's be super clear about that. The employees who are running your business don't want to have to keep calling the help desk because, oh, Teams isn't working again. I called them 3 times about that this week already, and they keep telling me they're going to fix it, and it's not fixed, right? There are really 2 dimensions of employee satisfaction that you care about in this context. One is the people who are doing the work, who are calling the service desk to get stuff fixed so they can do their jobs. But the other is the people on the service desk. It takes time and money to train those people. And it takes experience and seasoning and tenure for them to be good at their jobs. If you keep them satisfied and reduce the amount of churn you have on your service desk, then the benefit of having those trained and knowledgeable people continues to build because they get more experience. On the other hand, and this is a very common problem with large-scale commercial call centers at things like cell phone companies, you have to hire 25 people in order to get 1 or 2 people who will still be there after 2 or 3 years because their turnover rate is so high. Well, the problem with high turnover is you lose experience and knowledge, and that actually drives FCR down, which is the opposite of what we want. Okay, increase opportunities to sell. Well, it's pretty clear you're going to have a hard time selling something to a dissatisfied customer. So if CSAT is low, or if customers feel like your service operation doesn't do what they want, that's clearly a problem that's going to affect your sales. It may not seem as obvious for internal service desk operations where you say, okay, well, I'm not selling anything to my internal employees when they file a ticket with the help desk. But the fact of the matter is you are, even though you may not think about it that way. As an IT leader, when you are trying to get your users to adopt a technology or to get on board with a change that you're making, the last thing in the world you want is them saying, yeah, this is just like when they rolled out Yammer a couple of years ago, and we had all these problems and they never fixed them, and now they want me to use Teams. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. We've all had those conversations with users. They were dissatisfied by the way a previous rollout went or the way their previous problems were handled. And then they're reluctant to believe you when you say, oh yeah, but this time it'll absolutely be different. So improving FCR internally will help make it easier for you to drive adoption of those types of things. And then finally, this metric is really important because at the end of the day, if you can reduce the number of customers who are willing to leave your business and go somewhere else, you will be doing a very good thing for the future of your job, the future of your organization, the future of your products. It's hard to quantify, right? SQM says 98% of customers will continue to do business with the organization as a result of achieving FCR. I don't like that claim because I don't think FCR, it's not a journey like climbing to the top of K2 or walking to the North Pole. It's an ongoing process because as time goes on, the mix of service requests that you get will change. The mix of tools that you have to handle them will change. The level of knowledge and experience and good judgment that your service desk people have will change. And so it's not like you achieve FCR and you say, okay, cool, I'm done. What is true is that raising FCR and keeping it high and sustaining the improvements that you make are all critical to having customers be satisfied with their experience with your service desk. And that does absolutely drive customer retention. So if we all agree that having a high FCR is better than having a low FCR, why isn't it higher? Well, there are lots of potential reasons. I tried to isolate the 5 that I think are the biggest and most significant ones. But if we were able to sit down at Ignite or Inspire and have a beverage of our choice and talk about this face to face, which I'm really looking forward to next year, boy, I hope. And we probably come up with a lot of other things, but the biggest that affect Microsoft 365 operations are these. Problems come in multiple buckets. Users are not reliable narrators. Nobody has complete visibility across the entire synoptic scope of everything that's happening in the service and on the clients. And then the actions you take, they both have consequences, but they also take time. So I want to drill into each of these causes a little bit more, because understanding why FCR isn't higher already is an absolute prerequisite to understanding how you make it get higher. Okay, so let's start with this. Problems come in buckets. And one way to interpret this is to mean, oh my God, I have a whole bucket full of problems, I'm doomed. That's not really what I mean. What I mean is that you can categorize problems according to where they originate or what the root cause is. And so I like to think of there being 3 buckets, and you could maybe argue that there are 2 or 4, depending on how you think about networking. But it's fair to say that every problem that you have is going to resolve down to one of a small number of potential root causes. That root cause might be in the red bucket, something that is related to the customer or the user. Now, those terms are a little imprecise because when I say customer, that could be the lady who's calling the service desk because Outlook doesn't work, or it could be the company environment, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean the end user. It could be anywhere, anybody in the chain, anywhere from the end user who's sitting at a particular device all the way up to the organization as a whole. But what I mean when I say customer is basically this is something that you, as a member of that organization, could go put your hands on. It's not something that belongs to the ISP. It's not something that belongs to Microsoft. It's a piece of equipment or software or user training that is within your company's ownership and responsibility. The biggest example, we've all run into this, DNS. Okay, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said the problem isn't DNS, there's no way the problem could be DNS, and then it turned out to be DNS, I'd have a lot of nickels. I could probably be on the beach now instead of looking out the window at the rain. The next bucket is the network. Now this is tricky because there are parts of the network path between the end user and the service that you control. But there are also parts that you don't. And the sort of the definition of what network means in this case, one of the reasons I said that you could make a claim that there are 4 buckets is that right now, many of you probably have large numbers of your users who are not working in the office. They're working from home, right? Well, now when you say there's a problem with the quote unquote network, is the problem with the network something that affects that individual employee because he has an old crappy Wi-Fi router that he bought at Best Buy for 20 bucks? Is the problem from where that person sits and their ISP making a connection to a Microsoft front door? Is it a problem with your VPN? Because I still see customers all the time that are using VPNs that are not split. So all network traffic goes from the end user sitting in her living room over the VPN to the company network, and then 365 traffic egresses the company network. If you're doing that, side note, we should probably do a whole webinar on this. If you are tunneling or funneling all of your VPN traffic to a single point and not splitting out 365 traffic, quit doing that. It'll make your life so much better if you let 365 traffic natively egress to the internet from wherever it starts. But like I said, that's another topic. So you could maybe say that networking is two buckets. One bucket is your network that the company manages and maintains. One bucket is the network that is at the site or the physical location where the end user who has a problem is. And then one bucket is all of the stuff that happens upstream of those two buckets. So for example, right now, if I were to do a real-time trace of network traffic going from me to Microsoft, what I would see is that it's going across my local Wi-Fi to a front door that Microsoft operates in Birmingham, Alabama. So AT&T is my internet provider. So the AT&T network is carrying that traffic between me and Birmingham. If there's any interruption in that flow, the service won't work. Once the traffic gets to that front door, it enters Microsoft's network, and then it's not in the network bucket anymore. It's in the Microsoft bucket. So I probably should change this diagram a little bit, but I don't know how to change it because I don't know if the Microsoft bucket should be bigger or smaller. Now that sounds strange, but the fact of the matter is that what most administrators worry about is that Microsoft's network or services will cause problems. In reality, the other two buckets actually catch many more problems, or catch is the wrong word. Microsoft has relatively few problems. So most of the time when you're having some kind of problem with an end user who's calling your service desk, it is not because of anything Microsoft did or didn't do. But just like Shark Week, I grew up, or my kids grew up, I should say, in the prime of Shark Week, when every year Discovery Channel would put out all these great shows about shark attacks. And if you get in the water and there's a shark within 50 miles, it's going to come over and bite you in half. And so naturally, people who watch those kinds of programs are really worried about sharks when they go to the beach. It turns out relatively few people get attacked by sharks. You're much more likely to be injured or killed when you go to the beach by things that are not sharks, like getting caught in an undertow or otherwise drowning. And yet, if you ask people what they're worried about at the beach, what are they going to say? Oh, I'm worried about sharks. Same thing. People worry about Microsoft problems, but that's not actually the type of problem you're most likely to find or to encounter. The reason that matters, the reason the size of the buckets are important, is because you can't fix the problem until you know what bucket it belongs in. If something doesn't work and I say, oh, well, this is obviously a Microsoft problem, and I file a ticket with Microsoft Service Desk, but it's really a problem with my DNS server or with AT&T, Microsoft can't fix it. In fact, not only can they not fix it, they probably can't even see what the problem is. So I'm going to waste a bunch of time dealing with them, trying to explain what the problem is. They're going to waste a bunch of time going through their troubleshooting playbook, trying to figure out what the problem is. And at the end of the day, guess what? The problem's not going to get fixed because it's not within Microsoft's power to fix it. So understanding what bucket the problem belongs in will lead you to understanding what you can do to troubleshoot it and who needs to get involved. And you absolutely cannot resolve a ticket or a call until you've started that process. Now let's talk about users, right? I know there is a big tendency among IT admins to talk about stupid users, ha ha ha. And that's not what I'm saying here. What I am saying is that your users are not IT pros for the most part. They run the purchasing department. They work in accounting. They hire people. They make widgets. They create vaccines. They fix microscopes. They do things that have nothing to do with knowing how Microsoft 365 works. So very often you will get service tickets that say things like, Outlook doesn't work. And then it's on you and your team to figure out, well, what does that mean when you say Outlook doesn't work? I've listed 6 things here that might possibly mean. And if you don't know which of those 6 things the user is really trying to tell you, then there's no way you can fix your problem. So part of effective FCR management or FCR improvement is getting to a point where you can quickly tell the difference between these different cases. Some of this is just a process thing. So if I sat down with all of these service desk technicians at a given company and I said, okay, when I say my Outlook doesn't work, what kind of questions are you going to ask me to help understand what the problem really lies? If I look at the quality of those questions, that's going to tell me exactly what I need to do to improve that team's ability to diagnose problems. And if you haven't done that, I encourage you to give that a try in your own organization. Just ask people, hey, if a user came to you and said, I'm not able to save anything in OneDrive, what kind of questions would you ask to try to troubleshoot the problem? That's also a great interview question for anybody in the 365 admin space, because it gives you a quick way to test how well they understand the components of Microsoft's environment. So free tip, write that one down. So when a user tells you they have a problem, you cannot necessarily guarantee that the problem they're trying to tell you about has the cause that they think. This problem is made worse by the fact that nobody has complete visibility. I asked my media team to put a blue curtain on this slide because that's the expression we semi-jokingly use to talk about Microsoft. Just like the old Iron Curtain, Microsoft's data centers are wrapped up in a blue curtain. We can't see inside it, and they can't see outside it. So you have, or should have, visibility and control over what's on your network, unless you're running SolarWinds. Okay, maybe that was too soon. But you should be able to see what's happening in your network and with your clients. And Microsoft obviously can see what's happening in their network with their clients, but they can't see inside your network. They don't know how you're in. Sorry, the cat is walking on my keyboard. You can't see what Microsoft sees inside their data center, and they can't see how your DNS servers are configured. They can see a little bit of public data that comes from telemetry from the clients. But at the end of the day, if you have a user, and I've had this happen, I had a user who came to me and said, hey, I'm having this problem. And the problem turned out to be a problem with their home network configuration that Microsoft never, ever, ever could have fixed because they can't see that user's configuration. They didn't know what kind of devices the user had. There was nothing they could have done if we had taken the ticket to them. So the key thing to keep in mind is this last bullet. Neither you nor Microsoft, with the tools that you have available, could see a complete view of everything you need to see for you to properly put an issue into the correct bucket. Now, you can get closer and closer and closer the more you know about everything that leads up to Microsoft's blue curtain. But because you can't see what happens once your packets go into that network front door, at the end of the day, there's always going to be this sort of element of mystery that you can't get past with Microsoft. So for example, if my boss calls me and says, hey, Paul, I'm not able to use Teams right now because every time I try to bring up a Teams meeting, the media is unusable. I'm never going to know exactly where the Teams Media Relay Service instance that gets created for his meetings is being created. I can make some guesses. I know because he's in Zurich that his Teams instances are going to be serviced out of Amsterdam. But that's really as close as I can get. And if my boss in Zurich is calling someone in Singapore, I have no way to know where within Microsoft's network that media relay service is going to be created. Microsoft wants it that way. So even though my visibility can get better and better, there comes a point where it won't improve any further than that point. Actions have consequences. Okay, so we've all had the situation where we were trying to fix a problem and made it worse. I used to run a school for the US Navy that was targeted at teaching junior sailors who had just come out of boot camp how to manage and fix problems aboard Navy ships and Navy installations. They spend nearly $1 billion a year on IT services and service resolution. And in part because they do things like this. One of the case studies we used was a case where a ship pulled into port and it was connected to the shoreside network. And the young sailor on the ship put in a bad BGP route advertisement that wiped out network traffic for every other device and network at that Navy base. So that was a pretty expensive problem for them to solve, right? And that's common. It happens all the time because the quality of your service desk and the amount of FCR that you get is only going to be as good as your weakest technician. So if you think about your least knowledgeable technician, the most junior person, the person with the worst problem solving skills, the lowest amount of knowledge, the least amount of emotional intelligence for dealing with customers, your FCR is always going to be anchored by how bad that person is. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, that's cool. I'm going to fire that person and then my FCR will get better. Well, that's not exactly how it works because it doesn't matter if you have 50 people and they're all great. The weakest one of those is still going to be, the gate. Even if that weak person is really good compared to the industry average, your overall experience is only going to be as good as the weakest person on the team. Part of the reason that that is true is that the knowledge and skills you have on your service desk don't always transfer evenly or they're not evenly distributed. We try to compensate for this by having tiers of service desks. So you've all heard about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, where tier 1 are script readers. Okay, sir, did you check to make sure that the device is plugged in? Okay, tell me what green, do you see any green lights on the front of your cable modem? Have you tried unplugging it and plugging it back in? These are all, those are all tier 1 or level 1 questions. You have all heard them. Some of you may have asked them at various points. Which is a bit tricky, right? Because those things don't transfer evenly, you have the problem where you end up with islands of knowledge, or maybe stacks is a better word. So you might have one team in one service desk location that has a lot of knowledge about M365, and another team in another location that doesn't have as much knowledge, but because they're in completely different time zones, one is in Australia and one is in Slovakia, you can't effectively transfer knowledge very well between them. And if the Slovak team gets a difficult call, they can't just kick it over to Australia because the Australia team is only there 8 to 5, Monday to Friday local time. There's some things you can do to help balance that knowledge out, but unless you take the effort to do them, they're not going to magically self-balance. Prioritizing is different. If I have 5 tickets, how do I know which one to work on first? What does my service desk think the priority is versus what's the priority to the business? And what is the downstream consequence or the downstream effect on FCR of that prioritization? There's one school of thought that says when you get 2 tickets, you try to resolve the one that will be fastest to fix first. Okay, that certainly sounds like a thing you would want to do for FCR so that you can knock out the simplest tickets as quickly as possible. But just from a business standpoint, if I have, if I have the CEO and she has a problem and opens a ticket, and I have somebody else who's in the middle of a critical customer escalation and needs to fix something, or needs to be able to get to their email to fix a $50 million jet airplane that's stuck on the ground, which of those is more important? Oh boy, that's tough. Then finally, COVID-19. There's so many things that I could say about service desk management and the impacts of COVID-19 now and the impacts that I think you can expect for another 2 or 3 or 4 or 50 years. We could do a whole webinar on that. What's missing from this slide is the fact that it takes time to apply any kind of action anywhere across the spectrum of things that you might do. I'm going through that right now. I have a case open with Microsoft's developer support because something in Teams, a Teams add-in that's supposed to work, doesn't work in my tenant. It doesn't work in my Quadratec tenant. It doesn't work in my personal tenant. It doesn't work in the MVP tenant that Microsoft gives me to test stuff. So what that tells me is it's not my device. It's not my network. It's something about the Teams client version or the Teams service itself. And yet, every time I talk to the engineers, they have me try one or two things. Like last time we took some network traces and I sent those off to the engineering team, and I have to wait for the engineering team to look at those traces and come back and say, oh, well, interesting, those look okay. Let's try this other thing next. So you have to keep in mind that every interaction you have and every action you take requires time to execute. And that depending on what your SLA for ticket resolution is or case resolution, you may find those actions take too long for you to be able to close the ticket. And if you can't close the ticket on first contact, then it's not a first contact resolution. All right, so far I've spent a lot of time talking about all the problems and all the reasons why FCR is low. You probably already knew that. Right? You're here because you want to learn how do you improve your FCR, and that's what we're going to talk about now. If PowerPoint will cooperate. So the first step is trimming the troubleshooting tree. So all of us at some point in our IT career have used a flowchart or a fault tree to try to figure out what's wrong with something. This is both good and bad. The idea behind having a flowchart or a fault tree is very seductive because it implies that, okay, this is a deterministic process. And if I start at the same place and I follow the same path through the tree, I'll always end up in the same location. So if I start in Huntsville and I get on Interstate 65 and I drive south without stopping, 100% of the time I will end up in Mobile, Alabama, looking at Mobile Bay and the Gulf of Mexico, no matter what. That level of certainty is something we all want for troubleshooting. But the fact of the matter is that it also means if you become reliant on troubleshooting based on fault trees, there will be times when you spend time checking something that doesn't need to be checked. Because if you look at the illustration I have here, it starts with Outlook is broken at the root. There are three paths I could take to troubleshoot that further. There's a branch that says device, there's a branch that says network, there's a branch that says service, meaning M365. Where do I start? Well, suppose I start by asking the end user, okay, does this problem happen on all your devices or just on one? Now, if the end user comes back and she says, oh yeah, this happens everywhere I log into Outlook, I can just cut off the entire device branch. I don't need to ask any more questions anywhere down that branch because I know the problem can't be with the user's device. If she has the same problem on a Mac and a PC and OA and Outlook Mobile, it's not the version of Outlook that she has installed. It's not some weird add-in or DLL or something. It's got to be something else. So the best troubleshooting is troubleshooting that you don't do. And the way that you don't do it is by removing branches from the tree so that you don't spend time looking at diagnostics that won't help you solve the problem. If I go to my doctor and I say, Dr. Spear, my arm hurts, she's not going to spend time looking at my legs or ankles to try to determine if they're the root cause for why my arm hurts. If I go to her and I say I have a sore throat, she's not going to look at my arm, right? So if you've ever had a medical exam, then you know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of trimming branches off the tree so you don't waste time chasing irrelevant questions. The problem is, in order to trim those branches off the tree, you have to be able to make some decisions or ask some questions fairly high on the tree to eliminate those branches. So in this case, this is a pretty simple example. You call me and say, hey, Outlook is broken. And I ask you a few qualifying questions to figure out, okay, what do you mean it's broken? Well, I can't send mail. Okay. Does this happen everywhere, or does it happen only on one device? It happens everywhere. Okay, when did this start? Those qualifying questions are going to let me choose a branch of the tree to focus on. And just, by induction, if you will, if I'm focusing on one branch, it means I'm defocusing the other branches. So what I want to do is I want to process, and I want tools that will help me figure out how to effectively trim branches off the tree as high up as possible. Now, it just dawned on me, one thing I should probably say, and I can say this because I'm actually a computer scientist by background. Computer scientists do trees backwards because the root of the tree is at the top and then the branches go downward. So if it helps to imagine a real tree, that's probably a better way to think about it. Okay, identifying the root causes. Well, this is really important, right? Because root cause analysis is, at the end of the day, the number one thing that enables you to get FCR up. If you can identify what the root cause is, then you can remediate it. If you can't identify what the root cause is, you're just chasing symptoms. Hey, Dr. Spear, I have a headache. Okay, cool. Here's some Advil. That is not going to fix the root cause of my headache. It might reduce the impact. So it's a mitigation, but it doesn't solve the problem. So as you probably all already know, this process of root cause analysis starts with you ask some basic questions to figure out what the scope of the problem is. Who does this apply to? Right? You're looking to rule out things whenever possible. So if my boss calls me and he says, Paul, I can't use Teams. Every time I get on a Teams audio call, the audio sounds like a robot gargling marbles. Then I'm going to ask him some questions. Okay, well, when did this start? Have you always had this problem? Has it gotten worse or better recently? Does it happen all the time? Then the next thing I might do is I might look to see, do I have any tickets or complaints from other people in the same office? So I go look at our service ticket database and I go, so he's reporting this problem from the office in Zurich. And I have 2 other tickets that were also opened this morning for the same problem in Zurich. What does that tell me? It's probably not limited to that one user. So the root cause is not going to be you have a crappy microphone or you don't have enough internet bandwidth at your house. Okay, I can rule out any analysis of Thomas's headset or the device drivers on his PC as a root cause of the problem. That helps me trim branches off the tree. Then once I've started to get a better idea of where the root cause might be, right? Because right at first, I'm not going to be able to zoom all the way in and go, oh yeah, it's obvious the root cause is because of this very specific thing. Your ability to do that, or your team's ability to do that, is going to increase the more experience they get with the service. But a lot of times it can be difficult to tell exactly what the root cause is. So that's when you turn to some of the other tools that you have in your toolbox to help you understand how broad the problem is, because that gives you information about the likely root cause. So if I get a call and the call says, I can't open any pages in SharePoint. Every time I try, I get a 503 error from Microsoft. Okay, well, as an experienced administrator, my first thought is anytime I see a 500 HTTP error, any of the 500 series errors, what that means is there is a problem on the service side. It is not an end user problem. It's not something I can do anything about. But one quick way to clarify that is go look at the Service Health Dashboard. Now, we all know there are about 1 billion problems with the Service Health Dashboard as a primary diagnostic tool. But as a cross-check, if somebody's reporting a problem and you go look in the SHD and you see Microsoft says, yeah, we're investigating this problem with SharePoint pages bringing up 503s, congratulations. You have just confirmed that user's problem. Now, here's the tricky part. Just because you can confirm that that is a problem for the user, that probably doesn't mean you get to mark their case as resolved. Maybe you can, depending on the nature of your environment. If I'm a user and I call into my service desk and say, I can't load SharePoint pages, and they say, oh yeah, Microsoft knows about that problem and they're working on it, I'm probably not going to say, cool, go ahead and close my ticket. I'm not calling because of the problem. I'm calling because I can't do my work because of the problem. But depending on the user, depending on the environment, it may be okay for you to say, yep, it's a known issue with Microsoft. I'm going to close your ticket because there's nothing else we can do about it at this point. The goal of this root cause process is to figure out which bucket to put the problem is. The root cause is a problem with the Microsoft service. Great, it's a Microsoft bucket. The root cause is network traffic is not making it from this person's mobile device all the way to the front door. Cool, it's probably a network problem. When you get the problem in the right bucket, then you can use the correct tools to solve it. Now, I mentioned before that one of the things we would be talking about is how important it is to have broad activity data and audit data. The reason for that may seem a little non-obvious at first. What it boils down to, though, is you need to be able to see everything that was done to or with or by that user account. Now, you don't necessarily need to know this 100% of the time for 100% of the cases. But in the broad case, if a user calls you and says, I keep getting MFA prompts, and no matter what password I put in, the system tells me my password is wrong. Okay, well, let's think just informally. Let's reason about what might have happened. One thing that might have happened is the user might be completely wrong about what his password is. He just woke up this morning and completely forgot his password. That does happen sometimes. I'm 52. It happens to me more than I would like to admit, especially if you try to do the right thing and have unique, strong passwords for different services. Now, the actual solution to that is get a password manager like LastPass and use it, and that's what I do. But I've definitely had that feeling of, man, this password just doesn't work. I don't know why. I know the password is correct, and it turns out no, it's actually not. But knowing, did the user recently change his password? Super useful in resolving these problems. I can't log in. I'm sure I'm putting in the right password. Okay, Mr. Smith, I see that you changed your password yesterday. Oh, that's right, I did. I completely forgot about that. Okay, now I'm good. Ticket closed, FCR +1. All right. You also need to know what has been done to the user's account. Okay, and this is important because you will often have administrators who do things to an account that the user will not necessarily know about. There's another point here, though, that maybe is a little more subtle. So you can see what I've done is I've taken 2 screenshots from our Nova product and put them on here. The bottom screenshot shows audit activity data for my account, showing that I've modified some files in OneDrive. Totally expected. Of course, you would think an end user is going to be modifying files in his own OneDrive. But suppose that I called in and I said, hey, I'm not able to modify any files in OneDrive. Every time I try to save a file from Word to OneDrive, it says you don't have permission to do this. Well, guess what? Now this audit activity record is useful because I want to go in as a service desk tech and I want to see, okay, when was the last time that this worked? Hey, Paul, when was the last time you were able to save a document? Well, let's see, I was working on it this afternoon and I didn't have any errors then. And I went to dinner and I came back and worked some more and then I started having the problem. Well, now I can go look in the audit log and I can see, does it look like the pattern of activity has changed? Another great example. If you look at the activity data in this top screenshot, if an end user calls me and says, hey, I'm not able to join any Teams meetings. And I say, okay, when did this problem start? Well, I think it started about 2 weeks ago. Well, I can see this user has been joining meetings over the last 2 weeks. So what that tells me is the problem that they are explaining or the words they're using to explain the problem are probably not a good reflection of what the problem actually is. And I need to do something about that. So having activity data and audit data together, being able to see them together is really important for service resolution. Because without that, you won't know what happened, who did it, and what it happened to. And without that, there are a whole class or category of problems that you can't effectively troubleshoot. So I want to talk about some practical tools that you can use to help improve FCR. The first one is a tool that some of you may not have seen yet because it is new and it is not completely rolled out to all tenants worldwide. But Microsoft has added, and it's funny, you see, I just got a reminder for this troubleshooting call. This is with Microsoft Engineering to try to figure out why the hell that Teams feature does not work properly. So I'm going to talk to them today, and they're going to go off for 2 weeks and do God only knows what, and then come back and say, oh, we have one more thing we want you to try. So that'll be fun. Anyway, network health. So Microsoft has added diagnostic tools, or diagnostic's not quite the right word, maybe, reporting tools in the admin portal to help show you what Microsoft knows about network traffic that's coming from users in your tenant. This is useful because one of the things they give you along with that are metrics that say, or insights, I guess would be a better way to put it, that are driven by the metrics they gather. When we deployed this at Quadratech, one of the first warnings we got, or one of the first insights we got was, it looks like users in Slovakia, which for those of you who are not up on your geography is in Central Europe, near Poland and Hungary and Austria. Users in Slovakia are connecting to a SharePoint online front door in Macomb, Michigan, in the US Midwest. Clearly, that was not right. So we did a little investigation. We figured out why traffic was being routed that way, and we fixed it. It didn't cause any problems. Nobody had filed tickets against it, but it did mean that performance was poor for no good reason. Right? In other words, we were having a performance problem. It was small enough nobody noticed it, but it might have gotten worse over time. We didn't want it. So when you look at the network health, and I've got a screenshot, and we'll talk about what that looks like in just a minute. But when you look at that service health or network health data, it represents what Microsoft thinks it knows about your network based on telemetry from OneDrive and Outlook, and how they connect over the network to the nearest front door. Then we have the service health dashboard. I mentioned before that it is a poor primary source because it doesn't give you accurate or complete data that helps you understand how an outage affects your specific users. It just tells you, oh, there's a problem. And this problem may affect some users under some circumstances. What you want is you want something that will say, hey, I know that all the users who are in London are having this problem because OneDrive is down in this region. And the SHD just didn't tell you that. But as another set of data points, it can be useful. The next set of data points are internet tools. I kind of like using Down Detector. They do some automated site monitoring, but they also collect user reports where you can go to Down Detector and give a particular service a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And they do some interesting time-based reporting to help show you, where problems originated and how long they've been ongoing. You also can look for certain hashtags on Twitter. Microsoft, for example, has an O365 status Twitter account that posts notifications when they recognize that there are outages. The one thing that we haven't talked about at all, but you probably already know this well, there can be a 4 to 8 hour gap between the time you start having a problem with the service and the time Microsoft formally mentions it as an incident in the SHD. Because they have the same problem that we do of trying to determine, is this really a problem? How broad is the scope of the problem? Who is it affecting? When did it start? And so on. Right? So just like you're trying to figure out, is this problem specifically with Paul, or is it with everybody in Alabama, or is it with everybody in the US, or is it with everybody worldwide? They have to do the same thing. So there can be a time lag between the time you start getting complaints from users and the time that Microsoft acknowledges in the SHD or on Twitter or whatever that, hey, this is a known issue. So those tools are all free and they're all included with the service-ish. But there are other tools that might come in handy. Okay, network monitors are one example. And it's interesting. I sell a tool that does not actually compete with network monitors like ThousandEyes or even SolarWinds, right? Not to kick them while they're down. And that's because those tools do a great job of telling you how many packets went where and when and what happened to them, right? So if I want to know if my neighbor is doing okay, and I drive past her house at night and I see the lights are on, All that tells me is that there is currently electrical power being delivered to her house. So that means I know the power is not out. She's paid her power bill, or her power has not been cut off for non-payment. It doesn't tell me that she hadn't paid her bill. That's it. I don't know if she's home. I don't know if she has fallen and can't get up. I don't know if she's being held hostage by aliens. I can't tell any of those things just by seeing that the lights are on. So traditional network monitoring tools will tell you, if you send a packet, does it get where it's going? And that's useful, but that's not enough all by itself. One of the things that we built into Quadratec's Nova product is the ability to actually run application level simulations to tell you whether something is working properly or not. So when you see a red light on the dashboard in Nova, what that's telling you is we ran a test against, say, Exchange Online Auto Discover, and the test failed. Auto Discover didn't work. That gives you a very specific troubleshooting data point that you can use. Okay, Auto Discover didn't work. Well, now I'm going to jump all the way down into the lower branches of the troubleshooting tree to the branch that concerns itself with figuring out whether Auto Discover worked or not. I'll give you a hint, it's probably a DNS problem. But my point is, I didn't have to spend any time trying to figure out why somebody can't log into Outlook or what it means, because I know there is a specific problem with a specific piece of the service, right? So the ability to do monitoring of a workload or a feature within a workload, that's the best way to get to this point of being able to trim the troubleshooting tree as short as possible, right? So if you think the ability to trim that tree is valuable to you, then I encourage you to take a look at what we can do in Nova. But because I don't want this to be a whole commercial about Nova, let me pivot back and talk about what Microsoft gives you for free. So this is a screenshot from Quadratec's admin portal. And you can see here, I've got a larger circle here, and I've got a smaller circle in one city in Slovakia and an even smaller circle in another city. So we have facilities in all three of these places. And when you look, if you were to scroll down, you would see that there are some insights shown about network traffic in these locations. So all this data comes from OneDrive and Outlook clients that are phoning home and sending Microsoft telemetry about the quality and performance of the network connections between the machines inside this circle and the front doors that they're talking to. So you can see right now, I've got a network assessment of 76%. This would be like me going to my doctor and her saying, okay, Paul, you're 76% healthy. Of all the things you could be doing, if you did everything just perfectly, you'd get a score of 100, but you eat too many hamburgers and you don't get enough sleep, both of which are true. So that's why you get a 76%. If you start eating more salad and you sleep at least 8 hours a night, your score will go up to 89%. This is just like Secure Score in the service. Microsoft has some arbitrary metrics that they've come up with, and they calculate how good you are at hitting those metrics, and they give you an overall score to tell you how good a job you're doing. It's useful, right? It may not be complete all by itself, and it may not give you a perfect sense of what you should be doing or what's happening, but it's not a bad place to start, okay? And again, this is free. To get it enabled in your tenant, you go to the 365 Admin Center, and under Health, open that up, and you should see Network Connectivity or Network Health as one of the options. If you don't, that means they haven't rolled it out to your tenant yet. Okay, so in conclusion, if you want to improve your FCR, there are a few specific things you have to get better at doing. Some of these are people issues, meaning they relate to the people you have working your service desk and the training and knowledge they have. Some of them are process issues. Some of them are technology or product issues. So first, you have to be able to track emerging and ongoing issues in the service. So you need to know when Microsoft knows there's a problem, or when you think there might be a problem that Microsoft has not recognized yet. You need to know that so you know where to focus your troubleshooting efforts. You want to focus more on emerging problems rather than on confirming that, yep, this thing is still broken. Next, you absolutely have to be able to put every customer service contact to your service desk in the right bucket. so that you know whether you fix it with a level 2 technician from your own organization, or you fix it by filing a ticket with your internet provider, or you fix it by filing a ticket with Microsoft. Next, you have to be able to differentiate the scope of problems. So this problem applies to Paul versus this problem applies to everybody in the southeastern US versus this problem applies to everybody worldwide. Because there again, knowing the scope of the problem is going to be critical for you to get things in the right bucket. And then finally, you have to be able to take the correct actions at the correct time. We didn't talk at all about the importance of delegating access to admin level functionality in the service. This is another Nova feature that we have a number of webcasts and material on our website to explain about. But giving the right people the ability to take the right actions without giving them the ability to break stuff that you didn't want them touching is immensely important, because otherwise you can know what the problem is and not be able to do anything about it. I call this the kitten in the tree scenario. If your child has a kitten, the kitten climbs up in a tree, the child knows exactly what the problem is. The root cause is the cat got up the tree, but they can't take any action to do anything about it. Right? So what you need to be able to do is figure out how do you effectively enable your service desk techs to take the right action without also giving them the ability to shoot a hole in their foot or your foot or the entire company's foot. So I promised this would not be a Nova commercial, but I do want to close with a little bit of information about Nova's service resolution functionality. We help you improve FCR in a number of ways. One is we give you better metrics and better KPIs to see how your service desk is doing, but also to give you that audit and activity data that you need to troubleshoot what people are doing. Next, we help you move problem resolution to the left. If you think about the stages a ticket can go through and who can resolve it, obviously it's better to resolve tickets at level 1 of the help desk than at level 2, and it's better to resolve at level 2 than level 3. The best thing, of course, is to prevent the ticket from being opened in the first place. But what if you could allow users to fix some of their own problems without giving them new tools to cause problems for themselves? That would be pretty valuable too. So having the right degree of delegation for the right people with the right set of actions helps you lower the number of tickets you see and lower the number of times you have to push a ticket up to a higher level. I already talked briefly about service monitoring. Knowing ahead of time where problems are starting to emerge is a huge part of improving FCR. Because when you know that an emerging problem is happening, you can very often take proactive steps to stop it or to mitigate it before it starts generating tickets. So just like I said earlier, the best troubleshooting is troubleshooting you don't do. The best service resolution, the best way to resolve a call is to stop it before the end user even picks up her phone. Aligning the service desk to the organizational structure. You remember earlier I mentioned the idea that you might have service desk resources in different time zones, different countries, different geographies. The tools in Nova let you build an IT structure that mirrors what you want and not what you have. So for example, within Quadratech, I have people who are delegated in the United States to be able to fix problems for the service desk, even though my IT team is 100% in the EU. One way to approach that, the traditional way, would be I'd hire some IT people and I'd put them in the US. And most of the time they wouldn't have anything to do because the European team is handling those issues. The other thing I can do is I can take a couple of people in the US and delegate some troubleshooting and problem solving capability to them and let them backfill the cases that happen when Europe is asleep. So I can make a service desk structure that reflects what I want the business to be and not where people actually sit and how things are funded and who has control over those operations. The last thing is if you have multiple tenants, we can do all these things across and between tenants. So in multi-tenant environments and service provider environments, we have a whole arsenal of tools to help you manage those more effectively. So to learn more, I encourage you to drop by our website, quadratech-it.com, WAC Nova, and have a look. I think some of what you find will be very useful to you as you try to drive FCR upward and lower the cost and improve the quality of the service desk services that you offer to people. With that, Chris, miraculously, it's got to be a holiday miracle because I think this is the first time I have ever finished a webinar on time. I'll pass the baton back to you.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Paul. A session packed with practical advice. I hope that everyone joining us today found that very useful. And indeed, if anyone does have any questions, would like to learn more about Nova, please do visit the Quadratec website, and we will be sending you links to the recording of this session and the slide deck tomorrow. So with that, I'd like to wish everyone a happy holidays, and we'll see you again soon.
Yep, thank you all for attending, and happy holidays.
Cheers, Paul. Bye-bye.